In Jharkhand yesterday, Kapil Mishra ji was detained at the airport and he was prevented from visiting the family of Rupesh Pandey. So what is it that these two state governments have to hide?
A very good evening, namaste, and welcome back to Citti Media. I'm your host, Sharon Citti. Today, we are joined by the very well-known author and BJP spokesperson, Tuhin Sinha, for a conversation. Tuhin ji, namaste. Lovely having you here on our platform again.
My pleasure. It's always great to be, back on your lovely, informative channel.
Thank you so much for your kind words.
Nice backdrop of, Bhagwan Krishna in the backdrop.
It's changed from the last time. So it was. I think we
need the Sudarshan Chakra of Krishna to decimate, some of the people, some of the enemies of this nation who are attempting targeted killings of Hindus, which is what I believe our conversation today is around.
Yes. So let me begin by asking you, do you feel that the media has somehow underplayed certain killings that have happened, especially in the case of the Hindu community? And when you look at the entire Udupi hijab controversy that's happening in Karnataka, that's been amplified to a certain extent. So would you say that there are dark, shadowy forces which only selectively highlight certain issues?
Well, absolutely, you're right. Apart from limited names in the media like Rahul Shivshankar, Ashok Shrivastava, or Pradeep Bhandari, I think most of the mainstream media has very conspicuously ignored some of the targeted killings which have taken place in the last few months. Krishna Bharwad in Ahmedabad on 25th January, Rupesh Pandey in Hazaribagh in Jharkhand immediately after the Saraswati Puja. Besides that, the abetted suicide of Lavanya was equally obnoxious, but the way, I don't exactly blame only the media, I would say. I think the problem lies with the country's opposition. They have a very convoluted or a very sickening mentality when it comes to Hindu lives. So the same Rahul Gandhi, who is perennially on tragedy tourism and is waiting to rush to the homes of a Dalit, murdered or raped in a state ruled by the BJP, does not even consider or deem it necessary to post a tweet or comment upon the death of Krishna Bharwad, the death of Rupesh Pandey, or the abetted suicide of Lavanya.
Yes, in fact,
let me just complete. Virendra Paswan, a Dalit hawker, was killed in Srinagar on 5th October by Islamists and by terrorists. His body was taken back, had to be, his body was in fact cremated there. He was a native of Bihar. Did you see one political party comment on that? So is it okay for Islamists to kill a Dalit? Rahul Gandhi does not have, or the opposition does not have, anything to comment on that. But the moment a Dalit is unfortunately harmed in a BJP-ruled state, they rush into what is shameless tragedy tourism. The worst according to NCRB data, the worst record of any state government is of Rajasthan when it comes to crimes and atrocities against Dalits. Have you ever heard the Congress take responsibility, fix accountability, or take the onus and try to, arrest the crimes? So I think somewhere, instead of just blaming the media, we need to fix accountability upon the opposition of this country. At least in the Krishna Bharwad case, I'm glad that the case was immediately transferred to the ATS, and that is my limited point. These targeted killings need to be looked into by NIA and ATS because there seems to be an overall design, and there seems to be evidence to suggest that they are encouraged from abroad and with funds from abroad.
Very interesting points. And in fact, the DMK spokespersons are on television every night, trying to change the nature of the investigation, or at least attempting to influence it in the case of Lavanya's suicide. So, do you think there is a larger political pattern,
which is
especially with proselytization being, brushed under
absolutely,
the carpet?
and that is what makes these cases, both of Lavanya and Rupesh Pandey, very mysterious. In Tamil Nadu, DMK politicians have tried their level best to thwart a CBI investigation. In fact, a DMK leader went to felicitate the lady who has been accused by Lavanya of unleashing atrocities or torture upon her. In Jharkhand yesterday, Kapil Mishra ji was detained at the airport and he was prevented from visiting the family of Rupesh Pandey. So what is it that these two state governments have to hide? The complicity is not even, in covering up this case, it's so overt and obvious. And that is where the whole intention of the opposition parties come into question. I think if Hindu lives don't matter to these opposition parties, it points towards a very, disappointing future.
So, what do you think is the way forward? Because obviously you're in power, not in these states at least. But what can the BJP do apart from amplifying this on the
Law and
media? It's
order
what a
at
lot
the
of.
end of the day is a state subject. But I think other state governments should take the cue from Gujarat government, where the young Minister of State for Home, Harsh Sanghvi, immediately transferred the case to ATS. I think these targeted killings need to be immediately given to ATS and NIA because, like I said, there seems to be a larger pattern.
Okay.
In Ahmedabad, after the murder of Krishna Bharwad, I think one cleric, there is a video floating around where one cleric puts forth a list of Hindus who need to be targeted in future. So I'm sure there is a larger agenda. There are funds flowing in for this purpose. There is obnoxious indoctrination to go in for targeted killings. And that is where I think every state government should immediately transfer such cases to NIA and ATS. And even the center ideally should look at a law where killings of this nature are naturally transferred to terror investigating agencies.
Yes, and in fact, yesterday, in relation to the Udupi hijab issue that's happening, I saw a very prominent journalist, and I'm sure you've come across this video as well, going on BBC and calling a bunch of boys who were putting up a resistance. And perhaps, it's not justified as to what they exactly did. It may be even qualified as bullying or harassment. But calling them Hindu terrorists, don't you think, is a bit of an exaggeration?
No, so I think this entire, effort to paint Hindus in poor light is encouraged from the top by Rahul Gandhi, then by Hamid Ansari. This entire, in fact, that is what I have written in my article in India Today. The Dara Hua Mussalman narrative is a deliberate attempt to cover up for crimes against Hindus. And when I say, when certain groups of Hindus are bullying, I'm not exactly aware of the incident which you're referring to. But if they're bullying certain girls for wearing hijab, that is an act that needs to be condemned. No true Hindu can do that. But, to utilize these aberrant instances to immediately pass a judgment on the Hindu community is something which is very malafide. Now, again, through your show, I want to just put things in perspective. Nobody has banned hijab. There was a certain barrier only in the classrooms. Now, we all know that classrooms are meant for uniformity. We all want to promote equality among students. There was no bar on women wearing hijab, even inside the campus. There was a request, which later became a rule, to prevent them from wearing it merely inside the classrooms. There are 1,000 other places where you can flaunt your religious symbolisms, but to insist that you will wear it on inside the classroom is something which reeks of a very mischievous intent. I was on a television show 2 days ago, and I just asked the television anchor, if your channel tells you that you can wear the hijab inside the channel premises, but while you're on camera, you need to take it off. Will you go on a protest? It's as simple as that. But the sad part is that Islamists across the country have utilized this to once again go on rampage, have utilized this to, unleash a bullying tendency, very similar to what we witnessed during the Shaheen Bagh protest, very similar to what we witnessed, in the aftermath of the CAA being passed. And that is what, has me a little, that is what makes me a little worried, because many of these incidents are uncannily similar to, these uprisings that were happening or being encouraged in the minority community through the 1920s and 1930s, and which, eventually culminated in the sad partition of this country.
Regressive patriarchal practices are being promoted under the garb of ladki hoon, lad sakti hoon, and, under the garb of secularism and these other notions which are being highly politicized. Do you think these young girls, because of a few of them, the others are also being radicalized, and there is an imminent danger, especially if you look at it from a national security perspective? The place where the entire hijab incident is happening, the initial spot at least, is just a few kilometers away from the birthplace of Indian Mujahideen, where the Bhatkar brothers had been indoctrinated into radical Islam.
Obviously there are larger ulterior motives attached to the whole thing, because there are several Islamic countries, which includes Lebanon, which includes Bahrain, if I'm not mistaken, which have, done away with hijab in limited ways. But like I said, we have nothing, we have not even put a bar on it. I think if you purely look at it from an educational point of view, a teacher needs to ideally follow the facial expression of the students to be assured that the student is concentrating and has assimilated the information in a classroom. So look at it from a purely educational point of view. It made sense for the class teacher or the educators to ask for the removal of hijab inside the classrooms. But to make a huge mountain out of nothing obviously shows that there was some amount of preparedness going on. There was some amount of preparedness going on to hunt for that or wait for that new issue, which could be, multiplied or which could be escalated at a national level and, projected as an issue which was thrown in by the majority community to create a wedge. I think that is what makes the entire thing very suspicious. That is what I think any nationalist should be alarmed about and worried.
Right. In terms of what the government is doing, the BJP government, I mean, whether it's at a state level or at a central level, you're trying to introduce new legislations in this light to counter certain problems like forced conversions or proselytization or even radicalism for that matter. And one of the examples is Karnataka, where the government recently tried to introduce the anti-conversion bill with cases pertaining to forced conversions like that of Lavanya's. Do you think there has to be a bigger momentum where anti-conversion laws are passed in several of these states where such cases are more prominent, perhaps?
Well, absolutely more needs to be done, because like I have mentioned in my article, predatory proselytization has existed from the 1840s. It was a plan by the Britishers to culturally subjugate the Indians along with financially disempowering them. But for predatory proselytization to be allowed to exist in the country 75 years after independence, I think it is really shocking. So I think each state governments need to do more. Jharkhand, I think, had during the time of Raghubar Das, had already passed a bill. Obviously, it was faced with huge protests from the usual suspects. But I would agree that we need to show slightly strengthened willpower and to enforce a national legislation to prevent predatory proselytization and to treat it at par with some of the most heinous crimes in this country. Because at the core of it is a malafide designed to alter the demography, the religious demography of this country. Right. And India is India, or Bharat is Bharat because of its religious demography. So when you try to tamper with the religious demography, which by the way has been happening as a design by Congress governments in Assam, which have ruled for most of Assam for most of these 75 years. The demography of Assam was tampered by encouraging illegal migrants from there. Mamata Banerjee continues to groom the constituency of illegal Muslims from Bangladesh and Bengal. V. Achyutanandan, a CPIM CM, way back in 2010, had very clearly and very explicitly said that PFI is working on a design to alter the religious demography of Kerala, and 2030 is the target to achieve that. So I think all of these need to be seen in a larger context. The demography war is real. It cannot be wished away. It cannot be, brushed under the carpet, and it needs to be confronted with equal zeal, which hopefully, we will see in the years to come, because I think at least people are openly talking about it. There is an open, there is speedy redressal, at least where BJP state governments are concerned. But I think definitely we need to view certain state governments and certain, whether it is Jagan Reddy in Andhra or whether it is Stalin in DMK, I think they definitely need to be viewed with suspicion, because something fishy seems to be on their agenda and on their immediate execution list.
Thank you so much for these points, Tuhinji. Now, before we wrap up, I'd like to ask you this. As many well-wishers of the BJP government, what they want to see is uniform civil code being implemented. And this has been a demand for so long, and even the BJP has been making this a poll-bound promise several times. But I have to ask you, with the rollback of the farm laws and several other progressive legislations, are you confident that your government is going to implement uniform civil code sometime in the near future?
See, it's not going to be an easy task, but at the same time, uniform civil code is our ideological commitment. The abrogation of Article 370 was equally an ideological commitment. It took many decades, but eventually it happened. The construction of Ram Mandir was equally an ideological commitment. It took several decades, but eventually it happened. So that is precisely what I tell people. Don't ask these Tariq ka bataoge questions, because when we are committed to something, we will ensure it happens. But at the same time, this is something where some amount of consensus building is happening. I'm glad that the Uttarakhand CM has already committed to UCC. The moment the BJP government comes back, and Dhamiji has committed to UCC in Uttarakhand. And I think it's an interesting move. If state governments of BJP take a lead in it, I think the consensus building so far as national politics is concerned would become slightly smoother. But yes, I reiterate on your show, it is an ideological commitment which the BJP stands for. Now, Tariq ka bataoge is something, let the opposition parties indulge in that, like they have indulged in almost every issue. But those who know the BJP would know that we will make it happen one day sooner than later.
Tuhinji, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Having this conversation with you.
Thank you.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.